Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Had a Spider-Man Quirk, Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
In a tall skyscraper in the center of Tokyo, Japan, stood the Dettnerot Tower, a company that specialized in the production of suitable articles of clothing and items for every individual customer due to the nature of their bodies or quirks. Thus, ensuring that they can provide them with highly adapted products in just 3 days. Thanks to its techniques and systems, Dettnerot had risen to the top of the lifestyle support manufacturing companies. Recently, the company's president and CEO, Rikiya Yatsubashi, had decided to venture out into the hero support industry. While most of them were on Island, there were some facilities and companies such as Dettnerot that were located on the mainland. Mostly because these facilities were more privately funded and owned, meaning they didn't necessarily have to follow other guidelines or be isolated on Island. Yes, the Dettnerot company was a well-respected and functional part of the new modern society. What wasn't known, however, was that the company was in reality a front for remnants of the underground Meta Liberation Army that worked in the shadows to overthrow the government and liberate quirks. They did this under the philosophy that the free use of quirks was a basic human right and should not be restricted. They did this under the leadership of Chikara Yatsubashi, or more commonly known as Destro. While the initial Meta Liberation Army was defeated, Destro's legacy continued through his biographical book and his son, Rikiya Yatsubashi. He worked with other like-minded and well-established individuals to recruit a grand army to overthrow the government and fulfill Destro's memory and his desire for a liberated society. However, this was only part of the story, one that would eventually clash with a new rising hero. One that would become known as the greatest hero in the world. And in this reality, they had unknowingly helped in his rise and creation. It was here that we begin our story. One of the researchers looked over to a specimen jar that had a small black spider, with the number 9 painted on its abdomen. The scientist examined the arachnid before injecting it with a syringe full of a strange liquid. The spider twitched at the uncomfortableness before it crawled around in its container. The scientist then moved the spider over to a machine as 2 large machines aimed at it. The machine began to hum as green energy began to radiate off it and stuck the spider in the middle. The spider began to twitch and spasm before green lines began to appear in its hairs. The machine finally stopped as the scientist walked over and inspected the arachnid, only to find that it was lying on its back, legs curled inward. The man sighed as he shook his head. The door opened behind him as a well-dressed man with orange hair, a long sharp nose, and no visible eyebrows walked into the room. "Doctor, how goes the experiment?" he asked as the scientist shook his head. "Unfortunately, Mr. Yatsubashi, the test subjects keep dying after being exposed to the serum and radiation treatment," the scientist said as the man named Yatsubashi stared at him. "Do you think there is something wrong with the serum?" Yatsubashi asked as the scientist shook his head. "I'm not sure, sir." He moved over to a computer as he showed the man the serum marked MAF the 15th of August 1962. "The serum we developed should allow us to create new quirks based on animal abilities. For the best results, we've genetically engineered these spiders from several different species, creating super spiders. While these super spiders have shown traits of the quirk factor, we still cannot figure a way to transfer them from animals to humans. And as I mentioned, the spiders die shortly after being exposed to the radiation treatment." He sighed as he took off his glasses and rubbed his brow. To this day still have no idea how quirks initially came about, or even if they can be implanted into another host. The scientist explained as the man nodded. "So, what you're saying is that it's impossible?" he asked as the scientist shrugged. "Well, before stuff like quirks and superpowers belonged only in comics and films. Now it's a part of everyday life. So, I believe if we keep trying, we should succeed," he said with a hint of optimism in his voice. The man hummed in thought as he observed the dead spider. "Keep up the research. If we can find a way to create new specific quirks on demand, we can essentially increase our army of superpowered beings that can easily overthrow and take down even the heaviest of hitters. Thereby creating a new world where powers can be used freely, instead of being regulated by the government." He placed his hand on his forehead in an L shape as he smirked with a black mark growing on his face. "That is the will of Destro," he said as the scientist nodded. Yes, for Destro and the Meta Liberation Army, he said as copied Yatsubashi, as the man nodded and turned away. Sir, what should I do with the subject? The scientist asked as Yatsubashi looked to the dead spider. Collect the data then throw it in the trash, it's no good to us dead anyhow. He ordered as the man nodded and took the cylinder container to a trash chute and dumped the dead carcass down the shaft. The spider's corpse and container bounced around the metal chute before landing in a garbage pile. The trash was then collected by a garbage collection team as they dumped the garbage into the back of their truck and drove off. Now, normally sanitation would take their load to the dump, to be properly organized and disposed of. But these were a particularly lazy bunch and decided to take the pile to a place where trash was dumped regularly. Dagoba Beach. The truck pulled up in the dead of night as the two trash collectors dumped the trash in with all the other garbage that had washed up onshore. The once pristine beach looked like nothing more than a huge garbage dump and ruined what was once a romantic spot. The truck drivers then drove off without a second glance or care in the world. Hours later, the dead spider suddenly began to twitch in its cracked container, as it suddenly springs back to life. Its beady little eyes looked around in confusion before it crawled its way out of the container and looked around and looked at the large pile of trash. It crawled its way through the twisted metal and plastic waste as it soon spotted two individuals amongst the trash. One was a skinny, almost skeleton-shaped man with shaggy blonde hair and sunken eyes with only blue pupils exposed in the darkness. The other was a young scrawny kid with a mess of dark green hair, freckles on his cheeks, and emerald green eyes. These two were Toshinori Yagi, more commonly known as the number one hero, All Might, and his would-be successor, Izuku Midoriya. To recap, All Might was looking for a successor to his power, one for all. He found it when Izuku, after discovering his secret, attempted to save the life of his childhood friend, Bully, from the grip of a massive sludge villain. That brave act alone showed All Might that this young man was worthy of being his successor, for he had the heart of a true hero. But his body was that of a wimpy nerd and wouldn't be able to handle the extreme power of One for All. So, All Might took him on as his apprentice and started to train the boy's body to become a worthy vessel for the powerful Quirk. Which was why they found themselves here, to clean a section of the beach and instill the lesson of what it means to be a true hero. Come on. Put your back into it. All Might yelled as Izuku carried a tire on his arm. The entrance exam is only 10 months away. We got to get you in tip-top shape before then, he yelled as Izuku stumbled but got back up. Why yes sir, he said as he pushed himself up, while Izuku continued to move bits and pieces of trash off the beach. The small spider with the number 9 on its abdomen wandered over as it crawled on the trash. It soon found its way towards the young boy's backpack as it crawled its way inside, hiding out amongst the notebooks and All Might memorabilia. Hours later, Izuku placed down one of the heavy pieces of trash by the entrances as he wiped the sweat off his brow. Man, there sure is a lot of this, he said as he looked over the trash, realizing that there was still way more to go than expected. You are not thinking of giving up, are you kid? All Might asked. I mean it's only been one day. I thought you wanted to be a hero? He asked with a smirk as Izuku shook his head. No way, All Might. I want to be a hero more than anything. If it means I must clean this whole beach, I'll do it, he said, reaffirming his drive. I'm just surprised that no one has taken the initiative to try and clean it. Well, that's how it is nowadays, young Midoriya. Heroes are too focused on fame and fortune. They forget the little things that made heroes great and respected in the first place. Did you know that the first heroes started with community work to earn the public's trust? He said as he looked over the trash. Did you have to do this when you started? He asked as All Might thought back to his early days with his master and predecessor, Nana Shimura. A faint smile on his lips as her face passed his mind. Yeah, I did actually. Of course back then I was more fit than you were, so I inherited One for All a little earlier, he commented as Izuku looked down at his skinny body and frowned slightly. But you know the old saying, Rome wasn't built in a day. This is only the start of your journey, kid. There are no shortcuts, he said as Izuku nodded. Well, the sun is almost down, time to pack it up and go home. I'm sure your mother will be worried about you. Don't forget to show her the diet plan, it's important for the all-American dream plan, he instructed as Izuku nodded. He reached for his backpack strap and pulled it up, only for the spider to crawl on his hand and startle the boy. The spider, acting on instinct, sunk its fangs into his hand as Izuku yelped in shock. The venom of the spider began to enter Izuku's bloodstream as it spread itself to his blood cells, changing and altering them into a green shape as they spread throughout his body. The spider then fell off his hand as it shot off and crawled under a piece of garbage. "Young Midoriya!" All Might yelled as he rushed over to the boy. "Are you okay?" he asked as Izuku nodded. "I think so, a spider just bit me," he said as he looked at the bite mark on his hand. "Should I be worried?" he asked as All Might inspected the bite. Normally I'd suggest going to a hospital, but the bite doesn't look that bad. I don't see any fluids coming out, and it's not a bullseye mark either." "How big was the spider?" he asked as Izuku made a relatively small shape. "Then I wouldn't worry about it too much. Spider generally doesn't have enough venom to kill a human. The only dangerous ones in Japan are the Joro spiders, and the one you described was too small to be one of those. Just keep an eye on it and see a doctor if you start to feel anything," he instructed as Izuku nodded. He looked down at the small spider bite before he placed his backpack on and started to walk home. His mind kept wandering back to the strange spider and was wondering if he should be worried. But All Might told him not to worry, so there shouldn't be much to worry about. But as he started home, he noticed that his body was beginning to feel a little sluggish and tired as he opened his front door. "Mum, I'm home," he called out as he took off his red shoes. "Welcome home, Izuku. I've made katsudon," Inko called out as he smiled at his favorite food. Until he felt a wave of nausea and he placed a hand on the wall to support him. "Izuku?" she asked as she turned around the corner and noticed her son leaning on the wall. "Izuku?" she cried out as she rushed to her son. "Are you okay, baby?" "What's wrong?" she cried with trademark Midoriya tears in her eyes as Izuku raised his hands. "I am okay, Mum. I just felt a little winded is all," he explained as he managed to straighten up. "Are you sure, sweetie?" she asked, concerned for her only son. "I'm sure. I was working out today and I guess I'm a little tired," he smiled as she looked worried but nodded. "If you say so, tell you what, I'll put your dinner in the fridge. You just lie down and get some rest," she told him as he nodded in appreciation. Because right now, he didn't feel like having any food, he just wanted to crawl into bed and sleep for the rest of the night. Man, who knew training could be so tiring, he thought as he made his way to his bed, too lazy to remove his clothes and just flopped onto the bed. "And I have 10 more months of this to look forward to? Well, no one said being a hero was easy. I just need to sleep." He drifted off as his eyes closed and fell into unconsciousness. Later that night, sweat began to build on Izuku's body as he tossed and turned in his bed. He released small grunts of pain as he curled himself inward. He didn't know this at the time, but the genetically altered spider's venom and DNA were mixing with his. The cells in his body break down and restructure into a new hybrid-like state. In the center of his genetic core, where his quirk factor should be, a new core began to grow as it spread out like a spider's web. His nerves energizing and his muscles reshaped as he began to change into something amazing. The next morning, the morning is here. The morning is here. The morning is here. A loud ringing noise alerted the young Midoriya as his alarm clock blared with that annoying tone. He groaned at the tone and without even thinking, raised his arm out of his bed and slammed it down on his alarm clock, satisfied by the lack of noise it made afterwards. Crunch. But confused about the loud crunch it made. What? A groggy green eye opened as he turned his head to his bedside table, as his All Might brand alarm clock was smashed into pieces. He instantly shot up as he looked at the damaged All Might figure. "Ah! My limited edition All Might alarm clock. What the hell happened?" He then looked down to his hand as bits and pieces of the alarm clock were stuck to his palm. What the? He tried to pick off the pieces from his palm, only for them to stick to his fingertips. Huh? He tried to shake them off, but they refused to let go. He then stumbled out of bed, shaking until they finally let go, only for his hand to stick onto another one of his All Might merch, as the limited edition All Might Silver Age figurine was now sticking to his palm. What the hell? He shook and waved his hand around, only for his other hand to stick onto more of his merch. "Ah!" he yelled as he stumbled out of his room, bumping into everything around him. What the hell is happening? "Izuku. Honey, are you okay?" He heard his mother call out as she ran out of her room. "Mum. Help! Something weird's going on. He yelled as he stumbled into the living room. Come on, stop sticking. He yelled as he unknowingly stumbled his way to the balcony, which had been left open last night to cool the apartment, and tripped over the railing, causing Izuku to fall overboard. Whoa! Izuku! Inko yelled as she ran to the railing, fearing that she would find a stain on the ground, only to find him sticking to the building by his feet and a panicked expression on his face. Keep sticking! Keep sticking! He yelled as he looked back behind him to the ground below. Aye, Izuku! Hold on! She yelled as she ran back into the house. That's kind of the plan, Mum! He yelled back. His mother returned with one of the bedsheets as she threw it to her son. Grab on! She yelled as he did so, carefully moving up the building. The short woman doing her best to pull her son up. After finally pulling himself over the railing and safely back onto the balcony, the Midoriya duo took a moment to breathe. Until they started panicking again. Aye, Izuku! What just happened? How were you able to stick to the side of the building? Inko screamed as Izuku similarly freaked out. I don't know. One moment I was asleep in my bed. Then my alarm clock woke me up and I smashed it to pieces. Then I noticed the pieces were sticking to my hand and then more of my stuff was sticking to me. Then I panicked and started stumbling out of my room. His words soon degraded into a jumbled mess as Inko stared at her son's freak out. Izuku! Izuku, calm down. She grabbed a hold of her son's shoulders as she forced him to look her in the eyes. Just calm down and breathe. Okay, sweetie? She asked him as he nodded and started taking in calm breaths. His breathing started to relax, and his body become more chill, which also caused the merch and the blanket that was stuck to him to fall off. Okay, so relaxing helps. Good to know. He looked at his palms in relief. Izuku, what's happening to you? She asked as Izuku looked to his mother. I don't know. Wait, do you think? He looked down at his hands. This is my quirk? He asked, a look of hopefulness on his face as it mirrored on his mother's, before confusion. But honey, you're too old to get a quirk, and the doctor said you shouldn't be able to have a quirk. And last I checked your father and I couldn't stick to walls. She said as Izuku became just as curious as he looked to his hands. Izuku, what's going on? I don't know. He then spotted the spider bite on his hand as he got a strange thought. No, could it? He thought as he got up. I have got to go, Mum, he said as he made his way to his room. Wait, Izuku. We should take you to see a doctor. No. I know someone that might help, trust me, he's knowledgeable about this stuff, he said as he entered his room and closed the door. He sighed a breath of relief as he went to grab some fresh clothes. Got to get to All Might, he might know what's going on, he said as he took off his shirt and started to dress, only to stop when noticed his reflection in the mirror. What was once a scrawny nerd stood a more muscular version of himself that wasn't overly bulky, but leaner and more fit with an impressive set of abs, biceps, and pectorals. Izuku's only response to this was to once again freak out. Ah! Izuku! Inko called out when she heard her son scream again. When did I get abs? Later near Dagoba Beach. Izuku ran down the street, as his mind was running 1,000 miles a minute trying to work out what was going on with him. Okay, what is going on with me? How can I suddenly stick to walls? How can I have abs? I know exercise is supposed to give you muscles. But not after a day. The walk signals flashed green as he made his way to the beach. Got to get to All Might. Tell him what's happening, he said to himself as he ran across the street. However, he wasn't paying attention as a car came speeding around the corner, the owner texting away on his phone without a care in the world. Just as it got closer, Izuku felt this tingling sensation in the back of his head, and the hairs on his arms began to rise as he snapped his head towards the car speeding towards him. The sound of tires screeched as the driver tried to put on the brakes. But Izuku's body acted on instinct and he jumped over the car and landed safely on the other side. His eyes widened in disbelief as the car came to a stop. What the, how did I? He asked himself as the driver looked at him with complete shock. No texting and driving, he said before he bolted from the street, leaving a very confused driver and a slew of onlookers. Meanwhile, at Dagoba Beach, All Might in his skinny form looked down at his phone as he frowned as the time went from 9:59 to 10 o'clock. He's late. Then again, I did work him hard yesterday, must be suffering from the effects of excessive exercise. He'll be sore, but that's part of the process. Might need to alter the plan a bit considering. All Might. He gagged a torrent of blood in shock as he snapped his head to see his green-haired protege running towards him at full speed. All Might! Izuku yelled as he stumbled down the stairs of the beach until he was in front of the hero. All Mig Ga! He was cut off as Toshinori placed his hand over the boy's mouth. Keep it down, kid. No one knows about my real form. He snapped his head left and right, making sure no one was around. He sighed in relief. No one was here yet and it was a Sunday. Okay, now calm down and tell me what's wrong, he said as Izuku began to talk. Big mistake. All Might. Something weird is going on. After I left here yesterday, I started feeling a little weird. Then I went to bed last night and I didn't get a good enough sleep because I felt really funny. Then I woke up this morning and suddenly I smashed my alarm clock to pieces. Then the pieces started sticking to my hand. Then everything else started sticking to me and then I fell off my balcony. And then blah 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 blah. All Might had to recoil back as he was assaulted with a large assortment of incoherent blabbering as the world seemed to distort from the boy's mouth and the word mutter circled him. So, there was only one way to knock him out of it. He karate chopped the boy's head while yelling. Nonsense. The boy managed to shut up as he returned from mutter mode. Now explain everything to me, slowly, and tell me what's wrong. What was this about you falling off a balcony? Oh, okay. So I woke up this morning and suddenly things started to stick me. Then I kind of stumbled and fell off my balcony. What? Are you okay? Why did you fall off your balcony? I didn't mean to. I just got startled when things started sticking to my palms. But luckily, I managed to stick to the building by my feet and my mum pulled me back in. Anyway, I didn't know what was happening, so I decided to come and find you. But when I went to change my clothes, I found this. He lifted his shirt and showed his new physique, causing Toshinori's eyes to bulge slightly. I have a six-pack now, he exclaimed, as All Might just stared, blinking in surprise. I don't think you get muscles after one day of exercise, do you? No, not in the slightest. It usually takes months to get something like this. He poked the boy's abs, causing him to pull his shirt back down in embarrassment. This is strange, even for this day and age, and now that I notice it, it looks like you had a growth spurt too, he said as he noticed the boy was a few inches taller than before. His eyes narrowed as he glared at the boy. Young Midoriya, you're not using steroids, are you? Because if you are, I am going to be very disappointed in you, he said as Izuku's eyes widened in shock. What? No, I'm not using steroids. I'd never do that. I've never done drugs in my life. I swear, All Might, I don't know what's happening to me but I think this might have something to do with the spider bite. I think it gave me a quirk, he suggested as All Might raised a skeptical brow. Midoriya, normal spider bites don't give you quirks or muscles or a growth spurt. Well then, maybe it wasn't an ordinary spider. The pair of them looked to each other then to the pile where the spider had crawled under. All Might bulked himself to his hero form as he lifted the pile that the spider crawled under. Do you see it, young Midoriya? He asked as Izuku scanned the area until he spotted the spider. Yeah, I see it, Izuku said as he reached in, grabbed the spider carcass, and pulled it out. All Might dropping the pile back down as they observed the spider. Poor little guy, it must have died shortly after biting me. He looked at the corpse as All Might shrunk back down. Well, you're right about one thing, young Midoriya, that is not an ordinary spider. He took it from the boy's hand as he stared at the green lines in its hairs, the green tips of its legs and the number 9 painted on its back. Looks like it may have been one of those test animals they conduct experiments on. But I thought animal experimentation was outlawed after animals with intelligent quirks became more public, Izuku asked as the number 1 hero shook his head. Just because something is outlawed, doesn't mean it won't happen. Whoever did this was experimenting with something dangerous. But how it managed to give you a quirk is both puzzling and alarming. Toshinori had a dark look on his face. Is it related to him? He thought as the man who took his master away appeared in his mind. But he shook it off as he picked up a discarded can and placed the carcass inside. Training is postponed for now. I need to take this to someone I trust. Find out who was responsible for this and what it means. And I need to get you to see a quirk specialist. Why? Izuku asked as All Might stared at him. Whatever this spider did, it's obviously changed you. It's possible you were given a quirk, but for all we know, that quirk could be unstable. And I fear what could happen if I transferred one for all into you, he explained as Izuku nodded. So then, where are we going? UA Academy. Izuku stared with wide bright eyes as he marveled at the sight of the UA Academy. The best-known school for aspiring heroes and heroines. This was the place where the top 3 heroes had graduated from and gained early rank and recognition in the leaderboard. The school where All Might had graduated from. All Might chuckled a little at the bright-eyed expression of his protege before he tapped him on the shoulder. Don't get ahead of yourself, young Midoriya. We're just here for a visit. Remember, you still have to pass the exam before you can get in. He reminded as Izuku nodded with pure determination. I know that All Might, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get in here. Even if I must break every bone in my body to do it, he said determinedly, as All Might blanched the idea of Midoriya covered in bandages and casts. A sight, unfortunately, he would come to see very often, very frequently. Well, don't try too hard, young man. You can't be a hero if your body doesn't work anymore. Boy, am I one to talk, he muttered to himself as Izuku looked at him with confusion. Anyway, we're here, he said as they stood outside the infirmary. The infirmary? Why are we here? Izuku asked as the man smirked. This is where a friend of mine works. She's the best medic and quirk analyst anywhere in Japan. She's also one of the few people who know the truth of my quirk. She was close friends with my predecessor and my mentor. Really? He asked as the man nodded and knocked on the door. Come in. An elderly voice said as they opened the door. They walked inside to find a short, elderly woman with gray hair styled into a bun with a syringe looped through it. She also wore a doctor's lab coat and a dress with yellow and red vest-like designs on either side. 2 yellow buttons, a pink belt, pink boots, and has a helmet on her head. Beside her was a cane designed like a syringe. Toshinori, the old lady said as Izuku blinked at the name. I'm surprised to see you here. You're not due for a checkup for another 2 weeks. And your teaching position doesn't start for another 10 months. Why are you here, and who is this? She asked as the number 1 hero placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder. I'm sorry to bother you, but we kind of have a situation. This boy has a quirk. All Might explained as Recovery Girl sighed. All children around his age should have a quirk, but I doubt you brought him here just for that? She said as he nodded. The thing is, he didn't have a quirk until this morning, he said as she blinked before looking at the boy. It's okay, he knows about my secret. He's the one I plan to give one for all to, he said as looked at the boy up and down as if evaluating him. Isn't it a little soon to give one for all away? I mean, he looks physically capable, she said. She noticed the boy was more toned physically under his clothes, which had become tighter thanks to his new body. But if you've given him the quirk, why are you here at all? That's the thing, I haven't given it to him yet. That caught her interest. He just woke up this morning like this, he explained as she raised an eyebrow. Toshinori, do you expect me to believe this child just suddenly developed a quirk out of nowhere? She asked, finding it hard to believe. I didn't expect you to believe me, which is why I was fortunate to have this. He pulled out his phone as he showed her the picture of Izuku yesterday, scrawny and weak. That was taken yesterday after I decided to train him. He had no muscles and was roughly a few inches shorter than yesterday. Today he looks like this. He gestured to the nervous boy as he waved slightly. She raised an eyebrow as she looked between the photo and the boy. That is peculiar, but quirks have been known to change a body at random. What makes this boy special? She asked as he produced the can from his pocket and deposited the spider onto her table. Because we think he got his quirk from this, he said as Recovery Girl eyed the spider carcass. She grabbed one of her pens and she lifted it by its curled legs. A spider? You expect me to believe a spider gave him a quirk? She asked as All Might nodded. And what evidence do you have for that? She asked as the boy showed the bite mark. Well, there's this bite mark, and then there's this. He walked over to one of the machines and stuck his fingertips to the side of a heavy-looking machine. And then easily lifted it like it was nothing. And all of this happened after it bit me. I see, she said as he placed it down and relaxed his grip. I understand why you'd bring him here, but shouldn't you take him to the hospital? My infirmary isn't fully equipped to analyze this phenomenon, she said as he shook his head. You're the only person I could trust with this. I want to make sure nothing could go wrong with him when I give him one for all," he said as Izuku looked back with a small smile. Recovery Girl sighed as she placed the spider in a small glass vial. "Okay. But first we should do a physical examination before anything. I'll alert Principal Nezu and let him know the situation. But for now, young man," she said as Izuku stood up in attention, "please take off your shirt so I can run some tests," she said as he blushed slightly and looked to his mentor, who nodded. "I'll also need your mother's contact details so I can have her send copies of your medical certificates. Something I can compare them to," she said as Izuku nodded and gave her his mother's number. He then took off his shirt as he was left in his pants and shoes. She ran a few tests as she checked his new muscular structure. Seems as if your muscular structure has been altered to compensate for your new abilities, such as enhanced strength," she said as she pointed to the machine he lifted. "I theorize that this may allow you to crawl on walls," she said as Izuku hummed in thought. "That makes sense. I kind of fell off my balcony this morning and my feet stuck to the side of the building," he said as she blinked in surprise, before shaking her head and writing that down. "I see. Now, aside from the ability to stick to things, have you noticed anything else?" she asked as she wrote down her findings on a clipboard. Well, I nearly got hit by a car this morning and..." "You what?" All Might yelled, blood rocketing out of his mouth, causing the boy to shriek in fear. "Why didn't you tell me that?" he yelled as Izuku held up his hand in defense. "I didn't mean to, but it's okay because I didn't get hit," he managed to explain. "Well, that's obvious," he said, but still gave him a stink eye for not telling him. "But the strangest thing is, I kind of sensed it was coming towards me," he said as both All Might and Recovery Girl raised an eyebrow. "I don't know how to explain it, but when it came barreling at me, the back of my brain started tingling, I guess you could say. Next thing I knew, my body reacted on its own and jumped right over the car." "Interesting. Could you describe what it felt like?" Recovery Girl asked as Izuku looked down at his hands as he flexed them. "It was like all of my other senses got cranked up to 11. The slightest breeze, the smallest touch, the subtle vibration from the ground, and even the tiniest noise was overstimulating. It was honestly a little too much, but if it wasn't for this sense, that car probably would have run me over," he explained as Recovery Girl and All Might looked to each other as they registered this information. "Interesting. I've heard that spiders have a unique ability to sense danger, mostly due to the fine hairs on their bodies that are sensitive to even the slightest alteration with air and moisture changes. Yours, on the other hand, may have possibly evolved from the supposed sixth sense that science still hasn't been able to explain. But it also seems to be linked to the body's fight or flight instinct to move out of the way of danger," Recovery Girl said as Izuku nodded in understanding. "Well, at least it will help him avoid danger," All Might thought to himself. Although given Midoriya's track record of running towards danger, that seemed unlikely. What about webs? Spiders can produce webs from their bodies. Can young Midoriya do the same? All Might suddenly asked as Izuku wondered the same. Well, traditionally spiders shoot webs out of a gland in their abdomens called a spinneret. The human equivalent would be around the posterior region. They paused as they all looked to Izuku's backside. "Young Midoriya, I hate to ask, but have you noticed any other changes?" All Might asked as Midoriya shook his head rapidly, almost in a blur by how fast he was going. "Well, I don't think you'll be producing webs anytime soon. If you did, you would have more than likely grown a spinneret near the lower half section of your spine. Like any other person born with a spider-like quirk, and from what I've gathered, you only inherited the physical attributes of a spider, not all its biological traits," she said as he sighed in relief. "Still, I'll need to do some blood tests to confirm whether or not the existence of a quirk is at play here. I should have enough here to perform that test at least. I'll let you know the results as soon as I can," she said as she produced a syringe and a cotton swab. "Hope you're not afraid of needles, young man." He wasn't, but the sight of them always did make him queasy. A vial of blood was drawn from the young man as she used a small dab of it and observed it under a microscope. What she found gave her pause as she looked back towards the young man. "What?" he asked. "What is it? Is there something wrong?" "It's nothing." She looked over to All Might, giving him a signal to talk later. "But what I can tell you is that this indeed a quirk." The moment she said that, Midoriya felt this moment of overwhelming joy at the news. A quirk. He had a quirk. One that was his own. I'd like to run more tests, but I believe you've been through enough for one day, she said, interrupting his thoughts as All Might nodded. Why don't you head home, young Midoriya? We'll pick up your training tomorrow. I'll call you with the details. One of the staff will let you out, he said as Izuku nodded and began to stand up. What should I tell my mom? I'm pretty sure she's still worried about the fact I have quirk that's nothing like my father's or hers. How am I going to explain that? He asked as the two pro heroes looked at each other. Don't worry, just tell her that your quirk finally manifested. I can write down a medical note, explaining that you're a rare breed of late bloomers, and it caused a random mutation in your quirk factor. That should be enough to cover the fact you got your powers from a spider. The least people know about it, the better. Recovery Girl explained as Izuku nodded and she handed him a note. But this is my quirk, right? This is my power? He asked with a tone that All Might or Recovery Girl couldn't identify. Fear but happiness? She nodded in response. Yes. That is your new quirk now, she said as he smiled and picked up his bag. Thank you, I'll see you tomorrow, All Might, he said as he ran out the door, happy that things were finally looking his way. But as he left, All Might and Recovery Girl turned to the dead spider as they grew concerned about the strange powers that Izuku Midoriya had gained. A few hours later, Principal Nezu's office, the dead carcasses of the spider lay inside the glass vial as what was either a mouse or a dog or a bear sat in a large seat, staring at the spider. This was the principal of UA Nezu, who possessed the quirk called High Spec, which granted Nezu unparalleled intelligence, perception, and comprehension that far surpassed that of humans. Through this quirk, Nezu became capable of thinking, speaking, and acting like a person. Of course, before then he was a lab animal that was being studied and experimented on, due to his quirk. He was treated harshly and cruelly by humans before the law was overturned on animal experimentations, especially those that possess quirks that gave them human-like intelligence. For this reason, the principal was sympathetic to the small dead spider in the glass vial, as the number on its abdomen could only indicate that it was part of an experiment. The principal sighed with sadness as he picked up the glass vial and held it in his paws. Such a shame. I had hoped that stuff like this had been put to rest, but clearly, this is not the case. He looked up the shrunken form of All Might, Recovery Girl and Detective Tsukachi. And you believe that this spider is responsible for giving this young man superpower? He asked as All Might nodded. It's the only logical conclusion we could come up with. Young Midoriya was quirkless and unathletic when I met him. Then he was bitten by this spider and the next morning he could stick to walls and gain a trained physique. Or at least it must have given some variation of superpowers. Recovery Girl is still doing her examinations, Toshinori explained as the principal nodded. Tsukachi took the vial from the principal as he examined the carcass. What do you think the goal was with this spider? He asked as Nezu hummed in thought. It's just a theory now, but I believe someone out there was attempting to create a quirk with this spider and have those abilities transferred into a human host. However, it appears this spider either escaped captivity or was deemed a failure before results could be produced. Recovery Girl suggested as she thought about it. This is concerning. I had assumed only one for all or that person could give away quirks, Nezu said as he analyzed the spider. I think we all just assumed that only the two could, and this doesn't have his handiwork in it. He would skip trials like this and go straight to human experimentation. Besides, he should be dead. At least I hope he is. But if someone else out there has cracked the code to creating quirks and transferring them, we may be in a lot of trouble. All Might said as wrung his hands together. I don't think we have to worry about that. It would seem this spider was a fluke, and young Midoriya just happened to gain powers from the spider. Possibly due to his quirkless nature, Nezu suggested. But have we gone through the possibility this is just a latent quirk manifesting? It's not impossible, but it seems more likely than just gaining them from a spider bite? Tsukachi suggested. It's not a latent quirk, but the test showed the quirk was very unnatural compared to normal quirk factors. Almost as if it was artificially created. And the files I managed to gain from his mother indicate that the boy was indeed classified quirkless when he was 4, with corresponding reports from his previous doctor. Plus, none of the genetics indicates from either side of the family had spider-like abilities, she said as she showed them her report. Could it have been a random mutation? That has been known to happen on occasions? All Might asked as she shook her head. No, as I said, this quirk is unnatural, almost cobbled together from other specimens to create a super spider. This had to have been created in a lab somewhere. What exactly it can do I cannot be certain of, she explained as he nodded. But is it safe? All Might asked with concern as she nodded. It appears stable now, but I would like to run more tests just in case. We don't know if wall crawling is all he can do, and we have no idea what could happen if it becomes unstable. Assuming you still plan to give him one for all? She asked as his silence was all she needed to know. I see, well, he seems an interesting choice, but are you sure it's the right one? What about your former sidekick's suggestion? Wasn't he recommended for one for all? She asked as he nodded. I did consider young Tagada, and he seems like an ideal choice, but there is something about young Midoriya that I can't explain. He has this drive that I haven't seen in a long time, this unstoppable will to become a hero like me. But not just that, he generally wants to be a hero to save others out of the goodness of his own heart. I believe he is more worthy than anyone I've met before, he explained as the short older lady smiled softly then nodded. Well, that's all good then, Nezu said as he clapped his paws together bringing their attention back to him. Now, Detective Tsukachi will begin investigating the spider's origins, while we will monitor this potential candidate. If he is what you say he is, then we can enroll him through a recommendation and help him to control his new powers before the school year starts. I don't think that will work, All Might said as Nezu raised an eyebrow. How so? He asked. I get the feeling that young Midoriya wouldn't like being immediately enrolled due to a recommendation, even if it was from me. He wants to prove himself to others, and himself, through his hard work and merit. If he didn't, then he wouldn't feel like he belonged here and that would have negative consequences on his mental state. He's one of those earnest and honest types after all, he said as Nezu seemed to brighten at this aspect of the young man. I see, well then. In the meantime, though, we should see what he is capable of now. Bring him back here tomorrow and I'll have Cementos prepare Gym Gamma for the test. The more we understand his powers, the better we can help him control them. Should we be worried about the other members of the faculty? I don't want them to know about my and Midoriya's relationship, lest it interferes with their judgment. I can already tell Aizawa will be annoyed we let in a civilian without justification. All Might asked as Nezu waved his hand. Fear not, Cementos is your biggest fan and he will keep this secret well. As for Aizawa, he will be busy doing hero work tomorrow, seeing as he expelled his entire class after the first day. Nezu said as Recovery Girl sighed in frustration. That man has no tact whatsoever, he should be helping to improve them, not cutting them out if they don't amaze him, she said as Nezu nodded in agreement. Indeed, but right now it is our job to help this young man discover his powers and guide him along the path of heroism. We are after all helping the next generation of heroes rise, in case of the day the symbol of peace retires. Nezu said as All Might, and the others nodded. Little did they know, that the boy they would help, would become the greatest hero in the world. Midoriya resident Izuku walked home alone as he processed everything he had been told today. A quirk, he finally had a quirk. Sure, it wasn't he expected, and it sure as heck wasn't how he planned to get one. But the fact that he now had a quirk, and All Might training him made him feel like he was on top of the world. Still, it did raise many questions. Like, how was a spider able to give him a quirk? Who would try and create a quirk using spider DNA and why did it bite him of all people? So many questions yet few answers were available to him. But for now, he could just relish in the fact that he had a superpower to call his own and he couldn't wait to find out everything it could do. I need to experiment with this quirk and find out all that it can do before UA starts up. Maybe I should investigate creating webs, seeing as I can't make my own. He took a moment to pause as he looked down at his hands. But still, it's a little overwhelming knowing that I have a quirk, I finally have a quirk. Small tears began to form in his eyes as he felt whole for the first time in his entire life. His fist gripped tightly as he looked up with determination. There are still 10 months until the entrance exam. I must master this power and inherit one for all before then. I need to make All Might proud of me and become the next hero that can save people with a smile. Nothing's going to stop me now. He threw his hands up in excitement as he was overwhelmed with determination. Slap but stopped when looked over to where he threw his hand as it was stuck to a lamp post. Not even budging after giving it a few tugs. Okay, need to work on that. Monday at Aldera Junior High School seemed to drag on forever, as Izuku Midoriya sat nervously at his desk. His body shrinking low as possible, and his fingers tapping at his pencil, as he tried his best to avoid any unwanted attention. Which was hard seeing as he and Bakugo were still the talk of the town after being saved by All Might from the sludge villain. It wasn't often that someone from their class was saved by the #1 hero after all. He was lucky that was all they were focused on and not his sudden growth spurt. He had to thank his mother for altering his uniform until they can order a new one. If others saw his new body, they would question how he went from nerd to athlete overnight. He was glad she bought Recovery Girl's medical note about him manifesting a quirk after so long. The document Recovery Girl forged for him made it convincing and would allow for no further inquiries. Although, he was happy when he noticed the feeling of relief that seemed to wash over her now. He had a feeling she blamed herself for his quirklessness. He never held it against her, only wished that she told him the words he needed. But right now, he was just glad she was relieved. As for his classmates, he had thought about telling them about his new quirk, but quirks weren't allowed to be used on school grounds, and he doubted they'd believe him after being quirkless for so long. Let alone the fact that he gained muscles from it overnight. Even if he showed them, they'd ask how he managed to finally gain a quirk, which he couldn't tell them due to the promise he made to All Might. Thus, he decided not to show off his powers until he was ready, and they'd find it believable. But it was mostly to avoid being mocked, as well as his personal belief that quirks should only be used to help others, not to show them off like most kids his age did. As for Bakugo, or Kachan as he called him, he was being uncharacteristically quiet since the incident. Either he didn't notice his growth spurt and was just ignoring him, or he did and didn't say anything. Izuku assumed that he was still processing the sludge incident, how a quirkless Deku tried to save his life when he couldn't escape from the villain. It was probably a blow to his pride and needed time to adjust or erase that memory from his head. Izuku hoped that one day his old childhood friend would come around and be friends with him again, but that seemed unlikely. Right now, he had to focus on passing junior high, getting into UA High, and mastering his new quirk. Speaking of which, he got a text from All Might this morning telling him to come to UA after school. The principal and Recovery Girl wanted to test out more of his abilities and find out what his limit was. He wondered why he had to come after school, but he soon realized that coming in afterwards made sense. There would be less UA students and staff around to ask questions about why an unenrolled student was allowed to walk around UA Academy. Plus, the school would be better equipped to test his powers rather than at the beach. But unfortunately, this would be his last day at UA before the exams. Which meant it would be back to the garbage pile to clean up the mess, and he was okay with that. Because once he started something, Izuku was determined to get it done. I need to find out what I can do and master this quirk as soon as possible. The exam is only 10 months away, and I wasted a day finding out I have a quirk. Not that I am complaining about getting a quirk, but now I got to figure out how it works. But what else can I do? From what I understand, the spider that bit me was no ordinary spider, but rather an experimental spider. I somehow gained its physical abilities, but what else could it do? He looked down to the book he had on spiders as he searched through the pages. Judging from the information in this book, and the dead spider that bit me, I can assume it wasn't a documented ordinary spider, but was probably a combination of different species. Going off that I could have multiple abilities to work with. He turned the page to some of the spiders. Maybe I can jump high like the jumping spider, who can jump approximately 10 to 50 times their body's length, or my hair can become prickly like a tarantula's natural defense mechanism. He rubbed a hand through his hair and feeling no difference. No, I haven't noticed my hair changing, so I can cross that off, and it doesn't look like I can produce venom from my body. And I checked last night, and I can't produce my own web. Thank God for that, but I could camouflage myself. Some spiders can camouflage their bodies to match their environments. Maybe I can too. He looked at his hands and imagined turning invisible. Nothing, well, so much for that. Then there's the sense I have. I really should come up with a name for it. Clairvoyance. No, it warns me of danger, not see the future. Izuku sensation? Nah, too mouthy. Midori tingle. Too lame. Spidey sense. That works. Now as for the web situation, maybe I should look up building some artificial web shooters. I'm not an engineer, but with enough practice and determination I think that I can. He continued to read away, unknowingly muttering incoherent words as some of the class looked at him weirdly. "There he goes again, what a weirdo," one of the classmates said as he got a snicker from some of the class. While Bakugo didn't pay him any attention and just continued to stare at the board, his mind replaying that moment with the villain in his head, over and over again, watching as that wimpy nerd came running out to save him, while he was trapped and unable to move. It pissed him off but didn't know how to fully respond to it. Deep down he knew he was trapped, and if Izuku hadn't pulled him out he'd have suffocated. But his pride got in the way and he just chose to ignore it. It didn't matter in the end. Deku was still a quirkless insect, and he'd never become a hero or as awesome as he was. He's just a damn Deku, nothing more. The school bell finally rang as the class began to disperse, Izuku packing away his things faster than anyone else as he wanted to get out as soon as possible. Some of the other students noticed this as he near bolted out of the room. "Hey, where's Deku off to in such a rush? He's been weirder than usual since that villain incident a few days ago," one of the boys in the class asked, confused about the green-haired boy's behavior. "Yeah, doesn't he normally stay behind to study or something? He's usually the last person that wants to get out of this dump. And did anyone else notice he grew a few inches?" another boy noted as they and others noticed his strange behavior. "Who knows? Maybe he's got a girlfriend," one of the girls suggested as there was a silent pause before they exploded into laughter. "Yeah right, who'd want to date that freak?" another girl laughed as they made fun of the green-haired hero otaku. Bakugo just growled under his breath as he stormed out of the room. He was sick and tired of hearing them talk about that nerd anyway. He needed to go off and blow something up. The UA exams were 10 months away, and if he was going to make it in, which he was, then he needed to focus on getting stronger. "TCH, damn nerd," he grumbled as he walked away. Wait, when did he get taller? UA Academy 1655 Gym Gamma Izuku Midoriya flashed his temporary pass to the security, a green hoodie drawn over his head to keep his identity obscure, as he walked through the gates. Soon he and All Might, in his hero form, walked into the Gym Gamma section of UA, an area designed to help the students practice and improve their quirks. Luckily though, the students had gone home, and most of the staff were either in the faculty lounge, home, or performing hero duties, which gave them the perfect opportunity to conduct this private experiment. He was both excited and nervous at being in UA again. At first, Izuku felt guilty that he was given this kind of access early on, feeling that it was unfair for the other wannabe students. But All Might, Nezu, and Recovery Girl assured him that it was necessary due to the bizarre nature of his quirk. They walked in as Nezu and Recovery Girl nodded to them. Beside them was almost a man but looked more like a living block of cement. This was Smintos, a professional hero and modern literature teacher at UA. He had been asked by Nezu to construct a rudimentary obstacle course for Midoriya, to properly examine his new spider powers. "Ah, Midoriya, All Might, glad you've finally arrived. Now we can begin the test," Nezu said as he waved at the two. "Smintos, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to this. I know you must be very busy with your students," All Might said in his hero voice, to which Smintos just waved a hand. "Please, anything for you, All Might. You've been an inspiration to me for years now, this is the least I can do. Although I am surprised you've taken an interest in this young man here," he said as he looked down at Midoriya that was ramrod stiff. "He must have done something to impress you. Were you perhaps interested in offering him a recommendation?" "Ha ha ha, nothing like that. I just happened to run into this young man who had a sudden development with his quirk. The poor boy was confused, and I wanted to help him. So, I thought what better place to help him than UA. Seeing as I am about to start teaching here, I figure this will be an opportunity to help me teach students. Besides, this young man will have to go through the exam like everyone else. This is just a freebie on the side of life. So, I hope you judge him fairly when the time is right, ha 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 ha," All Might said in his boisterous voice, to which Smintos nodded in agreement. "Of course, All Might, I will treat him as any other hopeful candidate, you have my word," Smintos pledged as All Might nodded. "Sorry for the deception, Smintos, but I'd rather not have your judgment of young Midoriya be swayed by our secret relationship. No one must know that young Midoriya is my protege, or about my secret to transfer my quirk unto him. As for the spider, He should believe this is a quirk awakening that we're testing. The less that knows about it the better. Good on you, Smentos. All Might laughed as he struck his heroic pose. Recovery Girl in the background sighed as she shook her head. Thank you, All Might, and you too, Smentos. Now if we're done keeping secrets, then we can get started. Recovery Girl said as the two nodded. Now, from what we understand, Midoriya should be able to stick to any surface. Can you create a small environment with altering angles? She asked as Smentos nodded. Of course, that is simple. He placed his hand on the floor and connected to the concrete. The floor began to move as it came to life at his touch. The concrete stretching up from the floor and changing shape as smooth rectangular buildings and steeply angled columns emerged from the ground. Izuku was wide-eyed as he watched the cement hero change the gym from an empty lot to a full-sized concrete jungle gym. Will this be enough? He asked as All Might nodded. Wow, your quirk is so cool. You must have loads of applications for it. Reconstruction, property repair, capturing a villain, maintenance. What is the limit of your quirk? Is it limited by how much concrete there is? Do you have to be using both your hands to control concrete, or can you control it from any part of your body? Can you use other types like quick drying or high-strength concrete? Midoriya began, his fanboy mode activated, and he bombarded the hero with 20 questions a second. So much so that Smentos was having a hard time trying to catch or decipher his words. That enough, young Midoriya, you're scaring the pro. All Might managed to break through his ranting as Izuku blushed in embarrassment. Sorry, I get excited when I see quirks. He apologized as Smentos waved a dismissing hand. It's quite all right, young man. You have a very sharp mind on you. I think UA will be a perfect fit for you. Provided you pass the exams, he encouraged as Izuku nodded. All right, Midoriya, we're going to do a basic test of your abilities. Your wall crawling ability, your strength, speed and agility. But before then we should probably start with a light warm-up, a few stretches, squats, and jumping jacks should do. Recovery Girl suggested as Izuku nodded. He quickly changed into his workout uniform and stood before the adults. After doing a series of stretches, some that would put a professional gymnast to shame, he got to start the squats. However, he didn't consider his new spider-enhanced physiology, and when he started to get back up he put too much effort into his legs and slam, and managed to jump 83 meters in the air and slam into the ceiling of the gym. Young Midoriya, All Might yelled out in worry as Izuku lay plastered to the ceiling. Are you all right? He yelled as Izuku groaned slightly. Well, that confirms it. I have jumping spider in my DNA, ow. Smentos made a pillar for the boy who managed to get on and make it safely back down to the ground, where he was checked over by Recovery Girl. Nothing too serious, but I would caution not to go overboard, young man. She said as he nodded. Thanks, I guess I'm not used to my new strength. He said, careful about what he said around Smentos. It's quite all right, most people have trouble adjusting after an awakening. She said, playing along with the idea that young Midoriya's new quirk was an awakening. Well, now that's been taken care of. Let's start the tests. Please go over and start climbing the 90-degree surface. Nezu instructed as Izuku nodded and walked over to the wall. He placed both hands on the surface, as his fingertips instantly clung to the surface. He began to pull himself up, as a thought occurred to All Might. Wait, shouldn't young Midoriya take off his shoes for? All Might began before Izuku started crawling up the walls. The big red shoes he wore did nothing to stop him from sticking to the surface. Okay, never mind. Izuku wasn't paying attention as he climbed up the wall with ease. His concentration working on sticking with his fingertips, releasing one hand then placing them on the surface again. Effectively climbing the wall like a spider. Not even his shoes got in the way, as he almost instinctively knew how to make them stick to the wall. Well, that is interesting. I assumed he could only crawl on surfaces using skin contact. But it seems that is not the case. Nezu analyzed with his high-spec quirk. If I were to make a quick assumption, I assume he is unknowingly using the van der Waals force, using the electrostatic force to adhere himself to any surface, even though his clothing, Nezu explained. So that means he won't need a costume with exposed fingers or toes. All Might asked as the principal nodded. Yes, though I believe the material will need to be a bit thinner. That is something that can be compensated if he gets enrolled. Now, Mr. Midoriya, Nezu called out as Izuku looked back and down to the rodent principal. Would you please test the grip strength of your crawling? Say, head to the more difficult inclines. He asked as Izuku nodded. He did a small jump from one construct to another as he moved across the concrete gym. They found that Izuku could climb practically any surface on any angle. This was apparent when he managed to climb in a construct that curved inward and into a ceiling-like surface. He then spent the next 30 minutes getting used to controlling how to move around without accidentally ripping the concrete with his grip. They also learned that he was unaffected by the sudden changes in position, most likely due to inheriting a spider's ability for perfect equilibrium. Which was good, because it must be difficult for a hero that throws up every time. They saved the day. Somewhere in the Mie Prefecture, a gravity-altering hero in training sneezed. Excellent work, young Midoriya, All Might said as Izuku let go and jumped back down to the ground floor. Now that we have a basic understanding of your wall crawling, it's time we moved on to testing your physical strength. I understand. Did you know spiders can lift approximately 170 times their weight? I read a book about that fact last night and seeing as I weigh. Okay, we get it, young Midoriya. Boy, you like studying, but we need you to focus. All Might interrupted as the gym reverted to its previous state. All Might then walked over and grabbed a punching bag, as Smintos made a concrete stand for it. Now, we're going to test how strong you are by hitting this punching bag, he said as he hooked the chain to the pole. It's built with sensors that will monitor and accurately calculate how strong you can punch it. He explained as he tapped his knuckle to the bag. So, I want you to hit it as hard as you can. As hard as I can? He asked nervously as the hero nodded. But, I've never really thrown a punch before. Ah, then allow me to demonstrate. Copy what I do. All Might said as he got into a pose. Square up. Dominate hand and foot behind. Bend your legs slightly. Izuku nodded as he copied his pose. Make sure your thumb is on the outside of your fist. Don't want you breaking your thumb. He squared up and held up his arms in a boxer stance. When you go to throw your punch, twist your hips, swing your upper body and punch the bag with the flat of your fingers. Smash. He yelled as he threw a light punch, not using one for all as the punching bag rocked back from the air force. Except I want you to hit the bag, understood? He asked as Izuku nodded. Dominates behind. Bend my legs, Izuku began muttering to himself as he copied the pose and squared up. Twist my hips, swing my upper body and, he twisted his hips, swung his body and threw his right arm at the punching bag with everything he had. Smash, he yelled as his fist struck the punching bag. The bag was instantly thrown back as it tore itself from the metal chain, flew across the gym and slammed into the wall. The wall cracking from the impact and the leather bag tearing apart, spilling sand all over the floor. Izuku stared with wide eyes and a dumbfounded expression on his face as he looked down at his fist and the sandbag that he just destroyed. Haha. That was amazing, young Midoriya. All Might said, snapping the boy out of his shock. When I said as hard as you can, I never expected something like that, he said as Izuku blushed at the praise from his mentor. Truly splendid. Nezu clapped, always giddy at seeing prospective students showing their potential. Very impressive. I especially liked when you added smash into it. I can see I am not the only All Might fan, Smintos said as he got to work on repair the wall. Indeed, but while it is impressive, I must caution you about your strength, young man, Recovery Girl said as she looked at the tablet that registered his punch. The amount of force you unleashed was enough to crack a normal man's skull open. In the line of duty, you may be up against villains with more durability that they can handle a punch from you. But others, she left it hanging as Midoriya already understood. For most of his life, he grew up without a quirk, never knowing what it was like not to have powers. But now that he did, he knew that with them came a great responsibility with them. For if he wasn't careful, he could seriously hurt someone, maybe even kill them. If I truly want to be a hero, then I have to control this power, he thought to himself as he grew even more determined. Thank you, Recovery Girl. I'm sure young Midoriya will take that lesson to heart, All Might assured as he looked over the boy. If he has enhanced strength, how much will he be able to lift? We can't test that here, it would be dangerous to pile rocks on the boy. And we can't use the equipment in the main gym without running into other teachers or students that decided to stay behind. So that will be the first thing we need to check back at the beach. But seeing that punching bag, he may get the beach done quicker than before, he thought and knew he would have to seriously alter the all-American dream plan. Alright, now we'll do a quick test of your agility, Nezu said as the gym was changed again into more of an obstacle course. With concrete-looking bars, hoops and a small ditch. Complete the course in the shortest time possible. This should give us an estimate of your agility. Izuku nodded as he lined himself up with the first obstacle. Begin, Nezu announced as his leg muscles clenched and he bolted from the starting line. His body moving on instinct as he ran at an incredible speed. He sprinted through the hoops, slid under the poles and hopped over the beams as he made his way through the obstacle course. Impressive, Nezu noted. Cementos, I want you to target him now with your quirk. He asked as Cementos looked slightly shocked at the principal. Relax, from what I've been told he has a sensory ability that will warn him of danger. But we need to test it if it only works on organic dangers or any danger, he explained as Cementos nodded. He placed his palms on the ground and focused on creating attacks for the boy. Izuku managed to stick onto a wall when his spider sense went off in his head. He instinctively dodged out of the way, as a column of cement slammed into his last position. Whoa! He yelped, just as his spider sense went off gain as he ducked, dodged and weaved his way past the attacking cement. Boy, they take tests seriously here at UA. Izuku thought as his body moved around the course, dodging and avoiding the living rocks. But then he smirked, as he felt a sudden rush of confidence. Better not disappoint. He jumped over a column and ran along its surface, jumping off when his spider sense warned him of incoming danger and then safely landed at the finish line in a crouched position. How's that? He asked in between breaths as the teachers gave him small applause. He has natural reflexes compared to a professional athlete. Combine that with his enhanced strength, he may prove a challenge for professional heroes. Cementos noted as Nezu nodded. He's still young and learning, but he has the potential to be a great hero. All Might couldn't help but beam at the praise his protege was receiving but hid it well from others. Well done, young man. If you can manage to impress these two, then your acceptance will be assured, he said as he patted the boy on the shoulder, as said boy smiled at this. Suddenly they heard the gym door being opened and everyone snapped their heads to see a shaggy-looking man in a black jumpsuit, utility belt and what looked like bandages wrapped loosely around his neck. Eyes widened and Izuku went stiff as a plank. Nezu, there you are, I've been looking all over for you, All Might. What are you doing here? What's going on? The man asked as everyone snapped to attention. Aizawa. What are you doing here? I thought you'd be on patrol right now. Nezu asked, hoping to keep his eyes off Midoriya. I forgot something in the staff room, and then I wanted to talk to you about a drug deal I heard about from my informants. But when I couldn't find you in the office, I asked around and found out you'd be here. But why are you lot here? He asked as sweat began to build on their brows. We can explain this. All Might began, stumbling to find a proper explanation as to why Izuku was on school grounds. You see, the reason this young man is here is... What young man? He asked as everyone was confused and turned to Izuku, only to find he had disappeared completely. What the? They collectively thought, while Aizawa raised a skeptical eyebrow. Is there a student here? I thought everyone went home? He asked as he looked around the room. Question is, why are you here? And Cementos too. What's going on? He asked as he grew increasingly suspicious. All Might started before Nezu saved the day. All Might wanted to get some practice in with teaching students, so he offered to come in and help a young student that had trouble with his quirk. I asked Cementos to help by creating an obstacle course for him. Nezu calmly explained, having years of practice with dealing with people. We did have a young man here, but he had to leave early due to family problems. I can assure you this is all above board, he said as Aizawa stared before shrugging. Whatever. Glad to see the showboat is wanting to put some effort into teaching. That's rich coming from you, Recovery Girl thought. I have some things to discuss with you, but we'll do it later in your office. I have to start my patrol, I'll see you later, he said as he turned to leave, only to stop when he noticed the indent in the ceiling. Before shrugging and leaving the gym, everyone let out a collective sigh before they returned to the matter at hand. Where the heck was Izuku Midoriya? Midoriya. Young Midoriya, where are you? All Might called out as he looked for his protege. I'm right here. He heard him call out, but couldn't see him. Where? I can't see you. I'm right in front of you. He heard the voice call out as he looked around to where he last stood and cautiously poked at the spot, only for Izuku to cry out. Ow? Why, you just poked me in the eye. Ah. Sorry. But what the heck, young Midoriya? Are you invisible? He said as Izuku looked down at his hands, only to see they were transparent. I didn't know you could do that. And neither can I. Wait, how am I doing this? He asked. All Might poked him again and the area shimmered, and he briefly returned, before becoming invisible again. Amazing. Nezu said as he walked around the invisible boy. It appears you also have a camouflage ability. One that is not limited to just yourself, but your clothing as well. He observed as Izuku returned to full spectrum. But how did I do that? He asked as Recovery Girl hummed in thought. Some spiders are said to have the ability to camouflage themselves to their environment. But they usually change their color palette and texture to match their surroundings. Yours not only cloaks yourself but your clothes as well. It's rather impressive, really, she said as she jotted down this unexpected development. Tell me, what were you thinking just now? She asked as Izuku pondered. Well, I didn't want to get in trouble from, what was his name, Aizawa? He asked as she nodded. And all I could think of was that I had to disappear. Next thing I know, I was gone, Izuku said as she nodded. Do you think you can do it again? She asked as he concentrated but couldn't do it. Not at the moment, he sighed in defeat as she nodded. I see. This ability may be linked to your flight or fight instinct. You felt scared about being caught here by Aizawa, and your body reacted by becoming invisible. Nezu suggested as he too was curious about the boy's ever-expanding abilities. But for now, I think it's best we call it a day. I was sure that Aizawa would be away for longer, and we better not risk anyone else stumbling upon this, he suggested as they nodded. He then gestured Izuku to bend down as he shook his hand. Thank you for your cooperation in this matter, Mr. Midoriya. We hope to see you here at UA Academy next year, he said as Izuku nodded. And fear not, when the time comes, we will judge you fairly, as we would anyone else, Cementos assured as Izuku felt relief at that. I'll show you two out, he said as they both left, leaving Recovery Girl and Nezu behind. Well, this was unexpected. Do you think he has any more abilities that we're unaware of? Nezu asked as Recovery Girl looked over the data. It's possible. Like I said, his quirk was unnatural and more than likely man-made, using various spider species that I haven't been able to fully identify yet. There's no telling what else he could develop over the next 10 months. Toshinori will have to keep a close eye on the boy in case the worst was to ever happen, she advised as the principal nodded. Still, he has potential. I can see why Toshinori chose him. He could become a great hero if properly guided. That is, however, if he passes the exam. He then gave a small smirk as the two shortest members of the faculty staff walked away. But somehow I suspect he will find a way to impress us. Meanwhile outside, after making sure they were out of sight, steam started to drift off All Might before he transformed back into his skinny form. Huh? That was close. Didn't know how much longer I could hold that for, he said as he wiped off the blood from his chin. Are you okay? Izuku asked with concern as the pro-hero nodded. I'm fine. It's just something I need to get used to once I start teaching here. Still, I think that went rather well, don't you? He asked as Izuku nodded. We got a baseline of your powers, and we learned that you have a new ability to master. Yeah, still can't believe I can turn invisible. I thought for sure I was going to get in trouble by that Aizawa guy. He seemed rather intense about things. He didn't seem to like you though, he said as All Might chuckled. Yeah, that's Aizawa for you. He and I don't get along because he believes that a hero's work should go unnoticed and that media attention just gets in the way. I think he believes I'm nothing but a showboat that likes to flex his muscles for the camera. He would partially right. But being a hero isn't just about doing what's right. It's about reassuring people, making them feel safe. If that means a little quality time with the media, then I am more than happy to oblige, even if they do get annoying from time to time, he said, remembering all the interviews that tried to pry into his private life. He had one too many close calls with them discovering his secret, but luckily no one knew his true form. I see, that's deep All Might, Izuku said as the man nodded. Still, I wouldn't want to cross off that guy. He seemed intense, and he's a teacher here? He asked as All Might nodded. Oh boy, wouldn't want to be one of his students, he said as All Might chuckled. I don't think you have to worry too much about that, I highly doubt you'd be placed in his class. He reassured, not knowing that the universe has a wicked sense of humor. Now, let's head home for the day. We'll meet up again at Dagoba tomorrow. You still got a beach to clean after all, he said as Izuku nodded and they went their separate ways. The next day, Dagoba Beach in the middle of the trash-littered field of Dagoba Beach, among the pile of discarded scrap and metal, a young hero in training was pushing himself to his limits as he lifted a large fridge over his head. The young man holding it above his head as he carefully walked it to the staircase, before tossing it to the pile in the car park for pickup. He then picked up a large set of lockers and hefted them up with little to no resistance. All Might in his true form, watching with caution as his young protege displayed incredible feats of strength, which he did not possess 3 days ago. So far, they were testing how strong the young man was. They had seen what he could do to a punching bag, but now they wanted to see how much he could lift. There was a difference in brute strength and proportionate strength. So far, he seemed to have no troubling lifting heavy fridges, lockers and even an old beat-up car that was over 2 tons. They theorized he could potentially lift more, as an average spider could lift objects roughly 170 times their body weight. But unfortunately, they couldn't safely test that theory without safe supervision, and Recovery Girl would be too busy with UA and the exams in 10 months. So, for now, they were content with the knowledge that young Midoriya was stronger than an average human. Izuku lifted the large piece of metal over his head and placed it down as All Might watched on. You know, watching you pick up trash like this, compared to how you started, is mind-boggling, he said as Izuku nodded with a small smile on his face. I know, how do you think I feel? I grew up not having a quirk at all, now that I have one it's all so unreal, he said as he lifted more heavy pieces of trash and carried them to the car park. So, does this mean I'll be able to handle one for all now? He asked as he continued to move the trash. Yeah, about that, he said as Izuku paused. Wait, are you rethinking about not giving it to me, now that I have a quirk? He asked with a small hint of worry in his voice. No, nothing like that at all, my boy, I still plan to give you my quirk. There's no doubt about that. But I think for the moment we need to focus on developing and understanding the basics of your quirk before giving you another to master, he said as Izuku raised an eyebrow. See, the thing about One for All is that it's a stockpiling power. It carries with it the combined strength of 7 other users, 8 when I pass it on to you. He explained. When I use this quirk, I use it to increase my strength and speed to inhuman levels. However, my predecessor before me had a quirk, and while it also gave her an increase in physical strength, she said that One for All can boost a user's natural quirk. Before this spider bite, I planned to teach you how to use the quirk like I did, because we were both quirkless. Izuku's eyes widened at that. You were quirkless too? He asked as the man nodded. That's right, I too was born quirkless just like you. But now that you have your quirk, one that came about unnaturally, I'm nervous about what would happen if I give you this power. We still don't know the full lengths of your abilities. You already can climb walls, lift objects 100 times your own weight, turn invisible and can sense danger from any source. If I were to give you this power before you have a handle on your quirk, I don't know what would happen to you. For all we know, you could get an increase in power, or it might cause your quirk to become unstable and turn you into some kind of man-spider monster. Both had a strange image of a 6-armed man-spider monster with a spider's head and Izuku's green shaggy hair and freckles. They both shuddered at the thought. So, for the time being, I think we should master your own quirk before I give you One for All. But fear not, young man, you are worthy of this power. But your safety is also my concern, as both your master and teacher, he said as Izuku nodded. I understand, All Might, and honestly, I want to experiment more with my power anyway. If I'm to be honest, I have been having a little trouble controlling my strength since it showed, and I keep sticking to things randomly if I'm not calm and control. This morning I accidentally broke another alarm clock. I get the feeling I'm going to be breaking a lot of them before I can control my strength, he said as the man nodded. I agree there is still much we don't know about your powers. And I need to re-evaluate my initial plan, incorporate your new abilities to fit the criteria. Also, we need to test out your spider sense further and help you control your ability to turn invisible. We may also want to investigate developing a fighting style to match your new abilities. I know some people that could help, but you should learn to control your powers before we go that far. He then smirked as he patted the boy on the shoulder. Still, it's hard to believe a spider bite gave you superpowers. Sounds like something out of a comic book, he said as Izuku nodded. Tell me about it. But the road to becoming a hero isn't an easy one, right? Izuku asked as he looked down at his hands and gripped his fists tight. All Might nodded in agreement. Nothing worth having come easy. Especially with One for All. So, for the next 10 months, until I feel you are ready, we'll be training and honing your quirk. I won't always be around due to my hero duties, but I promise you I will do my best to train you and help master it. He promised as Izuku nodded. Now, let's get back to it. I'll reorganize my plan, maybe even find a new location to train in once you get this place cleaned up. But I still want you to learn the meaning of being a hero by cleaning this place. It will also be a good way to teach you how to control your strength. And with your new strength, it shouldn't take you more than, 5 months I reckon to get this place cleaned up. He said as Izuku smirked in another rare display of confidence. I'll get it all done in 4. He said as the man blinked before expanding to his hero size and patting the boy on the back with a healthy laugh. That's what I like to hear, young Midoriya, he bellowed with laughter as Izuku nodded. Now get to it. This trash ain't going to clean up itself. Yes sir, and so, began Izuku's first steps on the long path to becoming a hero. There would be many trials and tribulations that would be thrown his way, many choices he would have to make that would test his mettle and harden his soul. But it would all be worth it in the end, once the world would see the new hero on the horizon. One that would live up to and exceed All Might's expectations. He would become something truly amazing. A tiny recording icon was blinking in the corner as Izuku Midoriya set up the camera in his room, and there was the sound of a camera rustling as Izuku Midoriya appeared on the screen. Then, as he coughed, he sat down in front of the camera. Okay. Where to start? Hi, my name is Izuku Midoriya. This is a series of documentation on my progress with my new spider quirk. This is just in case anything else develops. So far, I've gained the physical abilities of an average spider, plus a few other abilities such as a jumping spider's leg strength and the ability to camouflage myself. I still have trouble controlling the camo ability as it only seems to work when I get nervous. He attempted to demonstrate the skill, but all he seemed to be doing was grunting. He grinned and reached for one of his new notebooks. See? But I shouldn't be discouraged. All Might said that it will take time to control my powers, just like it would if I were to. Well, I can't say in case anyone finds this. He showed him the notebook marked Web Formula, and opened the page to a list of chemical formulas and algorithms. In the meantime, I've decided to start a little side project and began investigating and creating webs. See, I can't produce my own webbing, and if I could I'm glad I don't. But as I started learning more about my powers, it became apparent that I'm never going to be like All Might. I mean, I'll be a hero like him, but I'll probably not fight like him. His style of fighting is more brute force and speed. But my spider powers give me new advantages over villains. He raised his powers sketchbook. So, I decided to base my fighting abilities and my costume on that of a spider. During these 10 months, I'm going to be conducting experiments on my new quirk. Testing the limits and strength of my abilities. This should hopefully prepare me for the exam in 10 months. Thanks for the baseline test at UA. I have a rough idea of my powers, but I need to learn more. Unlike most people, I only just got my quirk. Thus, I'm at a disadvantage from everyone else that has had theirs since birth. He opened his sketchbook to demonstrate the fresh idea that All Might had come up with. I'm also thinking of having him randomly attacking me with something, maybe a beanbag gun, to help me train my spider sense. So far, the sense goes off and I react to it automatically. But I still want to test its limits. I thought it would be a good idea to make my own webs. I mean, what kind of spider hero can't use webs? He joked as he put the notepad aside. Luckily, the school's chemistry lab has all I need to conduct my experiments, and I can probably buy what I need online from one of those chemistry sets. No one ever really notices me there, so I can work in peace. First, I need to create the fluid, then I have to figure out a way to properly utilize them. He displayed drawings of what appeared to be wrist-mounted weaponry. I got the idea from a pro hero that has a quirk called Dart. It allows him to shoot darts out of his wrist but needs bracers to properly aim them. I figure if I can make a version of that, I can expand my arsenal and have more diversity with capture, rescue and mobility. He put his notepad down and looked at the photograph. He shrugged and said, I'll admit that building something like this seems complicated and will probably take a lot of time. He grinned and reached over to turn off the camera. But from what I understand, the road to becoming a hero isn't for the faint of heart. If I don't put 110% into everything I do, then I can't call myself a hero. Day 1 of the spider experiment, web fluid test. After hours, the camera refocused and captured Izuku in the school's chemistry lab. He was bent over a test tube and beaker. As he attempted to mix the ingredients into a functional fluid, he spoke into the camera. Okay. Web fluid test 01 day 1. Adding the bonding agent. He grinned while adding the chemical, then scowled when the liquid reduced to a silly string. He turned off the camera and said, Great. If being a hero doesn't work out, I can go into the party business. Day 5 of the spider experiment, web fluid test 08. Izuku cautiously mixed in a solvent as he combined the two chemicals, saying, Web experiment 08 day 05. Previous 7 experiments have been failures. But I think if I add this, it should create a stable web fluid. As bubbles started to emerge from the beaker, the chemicals started to react a little too quickly. He attempted to halt it, but the chemical bubbles and spillover prevented him. He yelled, No, 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 as he hurried to the hazardous bin and threw the blanket over the beaker. Okay, not that. The trash can burst into strands of web, spilling its contents all over the floor. But progress. Day 10 of the spider experiment, spider sense test number 4. As Izuku was seen moving big, heavy trash from the beach to the parking lot, the camera switched on. His spider sense went off as he was taking care not to drop any of it, and he deftly avoided a beanbag that was being thrown at him. Even though he was able to grab the objects mid-air, he was struck in the chest by another beanbag. All Might brandished a beanbag shotgun and exclaimed, Come on Midoriya, don't let your guard down. A villain will strike at any moment, whether you're trying to disarm their weapon of mass destruction or trying to evacuate an innocent civilian. You have the advantage to sense that danger, but you have to react quicker, he said as he glanced at the camera. You know, even though I came up with the idea, I think he enjoys it a little too much, he said, swerving to avoid the obstacle. Dodge. Day 11 of the spider experiment, sudden development, healing. When Izuku appeared on the screen, the camera rustled. He showed a picture of his bruises from yesterday and then lifted his shirt to reveal clear skin. Hey, just thought I'd make a quick little vid. So, you know how yesterday All Might was shooting me with beanbags? Well, I bruised. But when I woke up this morning, I found out that I have a healing factor. I think my body heals quicker than most. Not as fast as some of the regeneration quirks I've heard about, and I still have small bruised areas, but at least I'll be able to heal and help more people. So, chalking up healing, pro. Con. I get to be hit by more beanbags. He turned the camera off. Day 12 of the spider experiment, invisibility test number 3. Izuku stood in the middle of the rubbish heap, seemingly focused. Seated in a lawn chair, All Might was idly reading a newspaper and glancing occasionally at his young protege. Izuku asked, Anything? While All Might shook his head. Nope, still there. He sighed and started to mutter, Damn it. Okay, we know that it's triggered by a sudden reaction to stimuli. Maybe if we're able to replicate the same condition of that day, we'll be able to duplicate the same effect and blah 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 blah. Nonsense. Aha. Hey, and with that, he vanished from sight for about 3 seconds. Huh, that worked. Day 14 of the spider experiment, web fluid experiment 27. Izuku was in his room filling a beaker with the most recent batch of his web fluid compound. It seemed like the chemicals were combining fairly well until all of a sudden they started to burn. Ah! He sprinted across the room, snatched up a fire extinguisher, and sprayed white foam all over it. He stared warily at the foam-covered vial, his desk now covered in white foam and ash. before using the fire extinguisher to blast it again. Day 28 of the spider experiment. Web fluid experiment 054. Izuku turned back to the camera at the Dagoba dump, holding a fresh vial of milky white liquid when the camera began to operate. He shuddered a little as he thought back to the reprimand his mother had given him. Web experiment 054 day 28. I think I've got the formula down but have decided to conduct the experiments at the dump after experiment 27 accidentally ignited. As he removed the vial, he prodded it open with a metal stick to reveal spider-like webs that were tightly pulling on the metal. Izuku smiled at the outcome. He looked over at the garbage pile and said, "So far it looks promising, but I want to test its effectiveness on a large test field. Now if I got this right it should create a web-like substance when I throw it." As the glass vial crashed into the metal, he threw it. Chemicals reacted as it burst into a massive spider web assortment, smearing its adhesive material over the metal and joining it. Izuku approached, inserted a metal pole into the webs, and pulled. The webs clung tenaciously to the metal. "Yes!" Izuku exclaimed, raising his hands in triumph. He said, laughing, "Woohoo! Finally! Okay, that's the one," and turned back to the camera while clapping his hands enthusiastically. "Alright. Web Fluid 054 is the one. I just need to figure out how to use it," he said, glancing at the trash and noticing that it had shrunk in size as a result of his time spent cleaning it out. Day 44 of the spider experiment. Invisibility test 42. With no one on screen, the camera switched on. The camera appeared to be turned on without any apparent purpose. Up until that moment, when one of the All Might figures began to rise and levitate. "Never fear." "Why? For I am here," exclaimed All Might in a mimic voice, and then there was a little laugh, and Izuku materialized out of nowhere. He grinned and set the figure down, saying, "Surprise! I got the invisibility powers down." He turned invisible once more and appeared upside down on his ceiling. "It took a while, but I found out that it's linked to my fear responses. If I think of something I'm afraid of, my body will react and turn me invisible." He vanished and reappeared on his chair, saying, "So now I can turn myself invisible whenever I want." He vanished and reappeared on the side of his wall. "Of course, I can't maintain it forever. It takes up some of my stamina to fully maintain it, and sudden movements or actions will disperse it. The longest I've gone invisible is 15 minutes. He vanished once more and reappeared on his bed, saying, "But it's better than suddenly turning invisible whenever someone yells at me. Luckily, they haven't noticed it yet. The advantages of being a quirkless nobody. You know, I've noticed that I've started changing, and I don't mean the fact I have a quirk. Ever since the spider bit me I've been feeling more confident, like I finally feel like I belong. Maybe because most of my life I felt like I didn't belong, like I was a nobody. To not know my purpose. I mean, yes, I wanted to be a hero since I was 4, but after being classified as quirkless, I kind of knew that that dream was impossible. But now that I have my quirk, I feel like I can fulfill my purpose." He looked at his hands as he flexed him. It seemed like he was asking himself more than the camera, "Is this what it feels like?" "It feels good," he said, turning off the camera to gather his thoughts. Day 60 of the spider experiment. Web shooters version 01. Izuku Midoriya was in his room working on his web shooters when the camera switched on. His desk was cluttered with books on mathematics and electrical engineering, as well as a number of wires and electrical components that he had scrounged from the trash. He was welding the electronics together while holding a soldering iron and wearing welding goggles on his face. He grinned and turned back to face the camera. He showed the camera a photo of the partially cleaned beach and said, "Okay, it's been about 2 months since the spider bite, and I've gotten 48% of the beach all cleared up. I should be able to make my quota on time with All Might. He's busy with heroics today, so I decided to take some junk, electrical components and parts one found at the dump and start working on my web shooters, after I made sure to disinfect all of them." "Hey, they've been in a dump this whole time. You don't know what they could have, hygiene people," Izuku said as he showed him the schematics for the web shooters. "It's taken me a long time to read up on electrical engineering, and I watched tons of YouTube videos and reference footage on similar items, as well as other factors to help me make my web shooters. It's hard, but I feel like it will be worth it once I get these babies working." He had no idea that someplace in Japan, a girl with pink hair became excited when she sensed someone using her catchphrase. he said as he inserted a cylindrical canister filled with his web fluid into the web shooter. Now if I got this right, the web shooter's capsules should be able to hold enough web fluid for several hundred meters and keep them in a liquid state, before ejecting them and hardening when coming into contact with air and tension. By my calculation, the tensile strength should also be around 120 pounds per square millimeter. His fingertip sparks and burns as he slowly reaches forward to press the eject button, saying, "Okay, web shooter version 01 day 60. Moment of truth." He screamed, "Ow! You mother," as the device erupted into flames. He hurried over and used the fire extinguisher, saying, "Ah, not again." Burnt ash and white foam covered his desk once more. His mother exclaimed, "Izuku, was that the fire extinguisher again?" As Izuku instinctively turned invisible in a panic. "Don't you think about turning invisible, young man." With a slumped shoulder, the invisible boy uttered, "Back to the drawing board." Day 72 of the Spider Experiment. Web Shooters version 05. Izuku was going over the schematics once more while he adjusted the web shooter's circuitry. "Alright, if I skip that and tweak these levels, it ought to work." He set down the soldering iron and inserted a modified web canister while it secured. "Alright, let's get started." "Wait," he said, putting on a pair of leather gloves and adjusting the fingers. He hopped, expecting a string of web to shoot out of the nozzle, and pressed the button, just to be sure, but nothing happened. He pressed the button again, saying, "What the," when the shooter failed to fire. The gadget exploded, slapping him in the face with a thick glob of web fluid as he exclaimed, "What going on with it, gaw?" His muffled voice cried out, hum, as webs stuck to his face. He struggled in vain to get the webbing off his face, but eventually he fell back out of his chair and into his All Might merchandise. He reached blindly around his room in search of a small Stanley knife, which he used to sever the web's breathing hole. He leaned across his desk and exhaled sharply, gasp. It took him a moment to catch his breath, and his breaths came out in pants. "All right, I have to change that. I have to wait 3 hours for this stuff to go away," he said, and his room fell silent save for the sound of his clock. Note to self, make dissolving agent for emergencies. Day 97 of the Spider Experiment. Web Shooters version 09. Izuku handled the web shooter with caution as he inserted the most recent version of his web canister, treating it like a potentially harmful tool. Having learned from his past attempts at creating these things, he would not suffer from burnt skin or webbing on his face. Or the time the stupid device blew up the entire canister, leaving him stranded against the wall for 3 hours. When his mother returned, she saw a rather comical scene. He crouched beneath his desk, slid the canister into position, and slowly moved his finger in the direction of the pressure trigger. He pressed the button, praying that it wouldn't explode and hoped for the worst. Fwip. Gazing at a densely coiled strand of spider-like web extending from the shooter to the wall, he peered over the table. It resonated with a tiny hum as he carefully leaned over and touched the strand, plucking it like a guitar string. He was staring at the product of months of hard work when a small smile crept across his face. He abruptly yelled, "Yes! Woohoo!" while performing a little backflip and perching on the ceiling. "Izuku, are you using the fire extinguisher again?" "No, Mum. I just completed my web shooters." "That's nice, honey." After 3 months of diligent work and experimentation, he grinned as he turned to face the web shooters and saw his progress. He had his invention, his means of moving one step closer to the status of hero. He observed the web shooters form as he picked them up. They looked like they were constructed from random parts he found at the dump and were a little hefty. But their beauty was too strong for even that. Grinning, he strapped them onto his wrist. Now, for a test run, day 110 of the Spider Experiment. Web Shooters version 09. Izuku positioned the camera to focus while he stood in front of Dagobah Beach's massive pile of trash. Behind him, on the hood of a car, a row of cans was arranged, and he had his new web shooters strapped around his wrist. He raised his hands and demonstrated the web shooters strapped to his wrist with what appeared to be an adjustment. "Okay, now that I've developed the web fluid and the web shooters, I decided to give them a test run at Dagobah Beach. I made a small adjustment last night by adding these pressure triggers to the base of my palm here," he said, gesturing to the tiny pad there. Bending his middle and ringer fingers down to his palm, they touched the trigger. I've designed it this way so that it requires only these 2 fingers to activate, he said. He stood up and coughed into his palm, saying, so that I don't accidentally set them off when I make a fist or try to grab someone. I found that out last night. Less said the better. He turned and tapped the triggers, causing a brief glob of web to shoot out and strike the can directly off the hood and into the pile of trash behind it. Right, now I've designed it so that I can control how much web I shoot out. If I want just a quick burst of webbing, I give it a tap like this. He held it down as a strand of web shot out and grabbed the can. Then he jerked his arm back and pulled it straight towards him. And, if I want a strand of web, I just hold down the trigger and, he said. I've also found that the elasticity on the web allows me to pull back with ease. This will open up new possibilities, like saving civilians, stabilizing structures and increasing mobility when I fight. He grinned at the mechanical devices on his wrist. He turned, adjusted a switch on the shooters, and shot out a huge glob of web that hit all the cans and stuck them to the garbage. I've also added this feature if I want a huge amount of webbing to restrain a target. He released the cartridge, which shot out like a clip, caught it in midair, and held it up. I call it the impact web. But the downside is that 3 bursts are the limit before I have to reload. He smiled at the web shooters, a sense of pride rising in his chest. When I get into UA, I'm hoping to upgrade them to incorporate more webbing and maybe slim it down. Because as it is right now, they're a tad bulky and I want to add different web functions. But as they are now, they'll do. For now, let's see what they can do. Got 10 more days till the deadline, and I got a promise to keep. His experiments came to an end when the camera turned off. Beach Dagoba as he got out to see how his protege was doing. All Might's truck pulled up to the beach. He had been preoccupied with attempting to manage both watching the boy and carrying out his heroic duties, which frequently required some time. When he did, though, he was a great help to the young man, especially considering how fast he was finishing the beach. If he arrived today and the beach was already cleaned, he wouldn't be shocked. It was therefore not shocking when he pulled up and saw a beach with only white sand in front of him. A grin appeared on his face upon witnessing the accomplishment of his youthful mentee. He turned to his left to see his protege coming toward him while hanging upside down from a lamppost and clinging to a strand of what appeared to be spider webs. "See," he said. He chuckled and said, "Told you I could get it done in 4 months." He observed as Izuku held up the gadget, "I never doubted you could, and I see you finished your web shooters." He flipped down and landed in front of him, saying, "Yep, thanks to this and my new quirk, cleaning this beach was a cinch." With a laugh, the pro hero remarked, "But if it weren't for you All Might, I wouldn't have gotten this far." Izuku grinned at the compliment, saying, "Young Midoriya, I like you because you're modest to the end." Izuku nodded and took a more serious stance as he spoke. "Well, now that this has been resolved, we can proceed to the last phase. Young man, this power I'm about to give you is not to be used lightly. With it carries a huge weight, a huge responsibility. You've gotten stronger over these past 4 months. Learn to master this strange new quirk that's been gifted to you. But also, more confident. I worry that you'll get too cocky and misuse this power," he said while shaking his head. "I won't misuse it, All Might. I would never do that. You've given me so much, helped me more than anyone else in my life. If I was to betray that trust, then I would give up being a hero and give this power back to you," he said with a skeletal expression. After that, he transformed into a hero and removed a hair from his head. "Young Midoriya, you've come a long way, gained a power you were unfamiliar with, and worked endlessly to control it. There's a difference between something you were born with, out of luck, and something you earned through busting your ass. Your spider powers may have been a gift of luck, but you pushed yourself to master it," he said as he rose higher and tried his best to prevent himself from crying. He held up his hand and spoke in the most serious of tones, "So, puff out your chest, young man. You earned this fair and square. Now, eat this." Izuku gazed at the golden hair strand in the large man's hand before turning back to face All Might and asking, "What?" His expression was one of complete and total bewilderment. "You want me to eat your hair?" "Ha ha 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 ha. That face is hilarious, of course. I want you to eat my hair, although it doesn't matter either way, so long as you took in something with my DNA. That's how this thing works. What were you thinking of?" With an eyebrow raised by All Might, he said, "I don't know a hand grasp, a transference of power, a shining light, anything other than that. It just doesn't seem right. Didn't you get your powers from a spider bite? He took the hair strand and looked at it with disdain, then reluctantly said, "Just give me the hair." He then swallowed the hair. He shoved it down his throat, slightly gagging. Coughing up the strand, he exclaimed, "Oh God, the spider bite wasn't even that bad. Okay, I swallowed it, now what?" Izuku arched an eyebrow and All Might said, "Well, what do you think a stomach does? It digests food, so it has to do the same with the strand of hair you just ate." He questioned, "Do you know this from experience?" As All Might appeared to pause and tremble for a brief while. "I'll take that as a yes. So, the highest concentration that gastric acid reaches in the stomach is 160 millimeters in the canaliculi. That's about 3 million times that of arterial blood, but almost exactly isotonic with other bodily fluids. The lowest pH of the secreted acid is 0.8, but the acid is diluted in the stomach lumen to a pH between 1 and 3. So, taking that into account, I'd say it would take about 3 hours, my boy." Someone could interrupt him. Izuku sighed and he said, "Boy, you sure do know a lot of facts, don't you?" He acknowledged as All Might nodded, "When you grew up as I did, the library is the best place for solace." He questioned, "So, what happens now?" "Well, now we get to the serious part. Teaching you how to control One for All. Before, my original plan was to make you into a suitable vessel within 10 months. With the projected end time being the day of the exam. But because of your new quirk, enhanced biology, and strength, we can now spend time adjusting you to its power." Izuku nodded before he blinks. With a scratch at the back of his head, All Might said, "Wait, adjust? What do you mean by that?" Izuku blinked as she processed this information. "Well, to be honest, even though I've given you my power, you'd have no control over the output. Your limit would be either 0 or 100, with 100 almost certainly breaking your limbs," he said. The pro hero chuckled nervously as he asked incredulously, "So, wait a minute, you were going to give me your power and then send me into the exam, before I learned how to control it? Ah ha ha, ha, when you say it like that it does sound a little reckless?" Izuku asked, "A little," and then sighed. "Although given how weak my body was before and the time it would have taken to get it into shape, I suppose I would be lucky to get it ready by the exam date. Plus, now that I have my quirk and a stronger body, I'll be able to do more in the exam than just using your power once, right?" With a thumbs up, the man smiled and said, "Exactly. Now, seeing as it will take 3 hours for the hair to digest, I decided to take us to a new location. What I think will be suitable to accommodate your new web shooters and privacy to practice One for All," Izuku said with a brow raised. As the man motioned for him to get in the pickup truck and drive off, he asked, "Where?" Disused warehouse area. Izuku and All Might entered a sizable warehouse, where Izuku peered around in wonder. Despite this, the inside of it was much cleaner than the outside. The gymnasium apparatus appeared brand new, the floor was spotless, and there were reinforced punching bags and gym mats strewn all over the place. Izuku exclaimed, "Whoa, what is this place?" as the pro hero grinned. "This, young Midoriya, was an old warehouse facility my predecessor and I used back in the day. I had it refurbished recently to have it ready to teach you how to control One for All. I figured it was probably best that we move your training to a more urban environment, to fully test your spider agility and teach you how to control One for All." All Might in his small frame said walked with the young man through the warehouse. "Whoa. This is awesome, All Might. I can finally test out my web shooters to the fullest," he said, adjusting his shooters, leapt to his feet, and fired a line that reached the ceiling. Then, quick as a spider, he hung upside down while he adjusted to the equilibrium. "That's good to hear, young Midoriya, but I should caution you not to get too attached to support items. Many a hero had relied on them too much and found themselves at disadvantages if they're damaged or taken away." Izuku nodded in agreement. The man stared at the boy for a moment before nodding. "I understand, All Might, but I can't help but feel a sense of pride, I think, about making these myself. Do you know?" he asked. Izuku blanched at this, his face turning a little green. "Just heed my warning and use all of your skills, not just what works the most. Anyhow, it has been about 3 hours since you ate my hair." Don't remind me." Izuku flipped back down and stood in front of him, and he said, "Which means One for All will have been transferred into you." He had long since questioned the nature of One for All and said, "By the way, you never really explained how it works. If you've transferred the quirk to me, what will happen to you?" "I guess I haven't. Well, for starters, the quirk is yours. This means that you now have the power to give that power to anyone else, should you choose. As for me, I have only a portion left inside of me, residual embers you would say. So long as I don't overuse my time, I can continue harrowing for a year, 2 at most, if I am not pushed to my limits," he clarified as Izuku took in this data. "So, you'll no longer be the #1 hero because of me?" he questioned, feeling a tiny twinge of guilt and dread rising. Up until the moment All Might touched the boy's shoulder. "Young Midoriya, this was going to happen either way, either you or someone else would inherit One for All, and I would have to retire. In fact, with the way my body is now, I should have retired years ago. But don't worry, I still have some fight left in me. The symbol of peace isn't dead, not until it's time for the world to meet you," he assured Izuku with a nod. Guilt upon him. He led the boy over to a large column of metal that was placed in the center of the room and said, "Now, One for All is a stockpiling power that has collected the power of 7 other uses, 8 now that is transferred to you. The blowback from using it the first time will be hard, but the damage should be minimalized." Izuku arched an eyebrow. "Now, I want you to hit it using 100% of One for All," he said. "This will give you a feeling for what 100% will be like. That way you can learn to lower it down to a manageable level until you attain full control of One for All." Izuku nodded his head. He turned back to the sheet of metal and said, "Ah, I see. So, how'd I?" he inquired, grinning at All Might. He abruptly bulked up to his heroic form and said, "Well, when you use One for All, you have to concentrate, summon the energy inside of you. Pull your arm back, clench your butt cheeks tight." "Clench my butt cheeks?" He raised his fist in demonstration and let out a strong gust of wind, saying, "And yell from the top of your lungs. Smash." Izuku had to hold on to the ground to avoid being thrown away. Fortunately, it didn't blow a hole in the roof because it wasn't too powerful. Even so, it was still a remarkable display from the top hero. "See?" he asked, getting Izuku to nod. "All right," he said, taking stance as he recalled the brief punching lesson from 4 months prior. His tracksuit sleeve tore from the pressure as he uttered, "Shoulders square, dominate foot behind, twist the hips, squeeze my butt cheeks." Red energy crawled across his skin. "And shout as loudly as I can." Throwing his fist and twisted forward, he let out a high-pitched scream. Smash! His fist blasted out of the back with a violent tendency as soon as it made contact with the metal slab, bending inward at that very moment. The metal slab then took off again and crashed into the warehouse wall. It would have ripped straight through and into the ocean outside if not for its great weight and the reinforced structure of the warehouse. Then, with a loud clunk, the metal slab dropped into the flow, and All Might grinned at the power. Izuku stared too, utterly amazed at how much different his enhanced punch was from One for All's. That is, until his right arm suddenly started to hurt, and his brain eventually realized what kind of pain it was. Gazing at his right arm, he noticed that the entire limb was a vivid red color, akin to a severe sunburn. He cradled his arm and let out a cry of pain. All Might exclaimed, "Young Midoriya!" As he hurried to his ward. He said, "Young Midoriya, are you okay? How's your arm?" To which Izuku gave a grunt and raised his arm so the man could examine it. It hurts. Like all the fibers in my arm were pulled at once," the man exclaimed in agony while examining the wounded arm. Doesn't look like anything's broken. It looks like your muscles took most of the damage, probably some muscular tearing. One for All put a lot of strain on your body, even though it's more durable than most." As All Might and Izuku turned to see the recovery girl approaching them, an elderly voice exclaimed, "And once again, you two go and act recklessly before I even get here." An angry look crossed her elderly visage as she hurried over to the two. All Might barely had time to utter an apology before she struck the pro-hero's head with her cane, causing him to revert to his scrawny form. "Our recovery girl. I can explain, you see Ga." "There's no need to explain, you got overexcited, wanted to see what the boy could do, and proceeded without my guidance. Sigh. I swear one of these days you're going to give me an ulcer, both of you," she yelled as they both collapsed out of fear. As she felt and looked at his arm, she said, "Now, let me have a proper look." much to Izuku's distress. Examining the arm, she asked herself, definitely muscular tearing, bone seems to have held up. Maybe due to your new durability? As All Might glanced at him, she remarked, we also discovered he has a healing factor. With a tone that suggested danger, she questioned, and how did you discover that? This caused the pro-hero to audibly gulp in fear and swallow his saliva. She said, as I thought. Tell me, young man, while Izuku gave her a sidelong glance. How quick is this healing factor of yours? She inquired. She nodded and peered over his arm. Well, I had bruises that healed up in a few hours, and cuts seemed to heal instantly overnight, with no scarring, he said. I see. Can you move your fingers? She inquired, nodding as he finally succeeded in doing so, albeit painfully. She said, okay, and then put her lips on the arm, spreading them wide. The boy's arm then had a green aura surrounding it as the red skin quickly disappeared. This happened much faster than Recovery Girl had anticipated, as the arm healed completely in a matter of seconds. Izuku exclaimed, holding up his recovered arm. Whoa, he exclaimed, leaping to his feet and testing his arms. That's amazing. My arm's all healed up, he said, thank you, as she blinked. She said, that shouldn't have been that quick. While he hesitated, he looked down at himself and raised an eyebrow when she asked, how are you feeling? He questioned, fine, I guess. Why? My quirk speeds up the natural healing process of the body, depending on the severity a minute or less. But I've rarely seen it heal that quickly. And my quirk is not without its tax. It uses your stamina to speed up recovery. Yet you're telling me you feel fine? She inquired while nodding. He said, yes, as she sighed and continued to stare. Izuku stood rigidly in attention as she abruptly snapped, this quirk of yours is getting stranger by the minute. But in any case, knowing that your quirk also heals you is a relief. But don't be doing reckless things to test it, he nodded, but she cautioned, just because you can heal from injuries, doesn't mean you can heal every injury. He nodded, and she said, now, I need to get back to UA if anything else comes up, alert me immediately. There is still much we don't know about your quirk and I want you to be cautious. As he attended to the bump on his head, All Might remarked, well, that's good to know. So, given all that, tell me how you felt about it. How did it feel to use one for all at maximum capacity? As Izuku tried to remember what he had felt, he asked. It resembled a buzz or kapow. Alternatively, I understand now. It was similar to watching an egg burst in the microwave. As blood spurted from All Might's mouth in a fit of laughter, he speculated. Izuku blushed slightly in embarrassment as he said, that's a pretty lame kid, but whatever. But now that you've got a feel for it, we can spend the rest of the time learning how to control the power level. Izuku nodded as he said, or, in your case, reduce the microwave's wattage while attempting to avoid blowing up the egg. He had to figure them out, just like he did with his spider powers. Well, being a hero isn't easy, right? As All Might nodded, he spoke. Yeah. However, I believe we can have you in control of 25% before the test begins. You'll have a significant advantage over the opposition as a result. However, I also noticed that you don't really have a fighting style. Izuku shook his head and he asked. I considered imitating your movements. Like you, do you use one for all? All Might shook his head and asked. It's not always advantageous. Yes, I am a good teacher for you. However, you benefit from your quirk in ways that I am not. Your body moves more acrobatically than mine does. Your spider sense alerts you to danger, and those web shooters give you more options than my fists. I'm trying to say that while I can't tell you how to do it, I can assist you in learning how to control it. One for All is a special power that has been used uniquely by each user in tandem with their quirk. Although I didn't have a quirk, my master and the master who came before her did. Izuku nodded as All Might said, there are some things you'll have to learn the hard way, and others you'll have to figure out on your own. You will therefore be learning to navigate while we learn how to control one for all. Izuku nodded after thoughtfully considering what the wise man had said. You can look up to me and follow my example, but you need to be the hero you are, not the hero I am. I am aware of All Might. The man grinned and said, I promise not to disappoint you. All right, let's begin practicing now. I could get in touch with a friend of mine to get some training supplies. But let's practice our physical skills for now. Abruptly, he put on weight and smiled at the boy. "Young Midoriya, are you ready to learn from the best?" Izuku grinned and he growled. "I was prepared from birth." He prepared to learn how to use the power of one for all as a master and apprentice. Day 127 of the Spider Experiment, Swing Test 01. Izuku stood on the warehouse roof, adjusting the camera as it turned on. The warehouse itself was situated at a dock not far from the beach. The abandoned port was decorated with cranes and other abandoned machinery, and Izuku waved to the camera. "All right, it has been a little while, and working with All Might for training has gone well." He had to lie on the film about one for all in case anyone ever found it and learned his secret. "I've been training now to harness the power of my quirk, which I recently learned can increase my strength." All Might claimed he has a friend on Island who can get hard light training holograms for us. A cutting-edge training simulator that can generate opponents who are difficult to spare. The technology was still being developed, as far as I knew, but All Might claimed to know the guy who was working on it. However, it will take them at least 3 months to be ready. We have therefore been concentrating on hand-to-hand combat instead. Meanwhile, I determined that this location would be ideal for testing my web shooters in their entirety. Now I've proven they're good for capture, reinforcing weak structures, or rescuing civilians, he said, stepping back toward the building's edge. However, it was hardly the appropriate location to test their mobility on the beach. But I can thoroughly test out my babies here, among the tall buildings and abandoned cranes. Once more, a girl with pink hair thought someone was making use of her catchphrase. A basic swing from one end of this roof to the other will be the first test. He gestured to the other end of the roof before pointing to the others. Then work from going from one roof to the other, then maneuvering mid-swing. He clapped his hands and said, "I've set up more cameras to fully capture the test. This way I'll be able to see what I did wrong and correct it for next time." Well, let's get started. As he started the test, he pumped himself up. He stood tall on the roof, standing on a set of crates and scaffolding, and taking a breath. He made sure he had enough line before taking his first step off the crates and swinging on his web. He then looked up at the crane and fired a strand of web, giving it a few tugs to make sure it was secure. Only to thud soundlessly to land face first on his face. Oof! As he struck the concrete roof, he let out a cry. It turns out that he misjudged the distance to the ground and the web was a little too long, so he ended up eating gravel instead. Okay, too long. Day 127 of the Spider Experiment. Swing Test 02. Fast forward. Izuku pulled the line, nodded, and leapt again, only to hang off the ground and swing back and forth like a pendulum. He stood atop the crates once more and shot the web up to the crane. Too short. Day 127 of the Spider Experiment. Swing Test 03. Fast forward. As Izuku gained momentum and swung to the other side of the roof, he shot another line while his feet ran across the ground. However, he unintentionally let go and fell off the roof. As he hit the heap of trash below, there was a loud crash. "All right," he yelled, "don't let go," and he moaned from over the edge. Day 128 of the Spider Experiment. Swing Test 04. Fast forward. Determined, Izuku successfully swung past the camera, shot his web, and checked the line. Certainly, until his momentum turned him back in the direction of the crates, he yelled as he passed the camera. Nah. And he collided with the boxes. Ow. Day 128 of the Spider Experiment. Swing Test 05. Fast forward. Izuku fired his web, then swung past the camera, across the roof, and fired another line. Yeah. But the wind was blowing so hard at him that he couldn't see clearly, so he swung straight toward an old billboard sign. He cried as he crossed the other roof. Ooh! He cried out as he crashed into an old advertisement for car windshields, which was ironically a large billboard sign. He stayed there for what seemed like forever. Like, say, a bug on a windshield. He complained, "That's just insulting," while staying affixed to the billboard. Day 130. Fast forward Spider Experiment. Swing Test Intermission. Looking at the camera, Izuku was in his room. Well, so I learned something while swinging. Wind resistance. I have to fight the wind when I swing on the web, which makes it very challenging to see. He nodded, and video of him face planting the sign appeared on his computer. And if I can't see where I'm swinging? He then grinned and said, "That happens. Luckily, I've found a solution to that." He then produced a strange-looking pair of goggles with eyes that looked like shutter lenses and sharp edges. All Might was able to obtain these unique goggles that will aid in overcoming wind resistance. Since there are people with heightened senses quirks like mine, they apparently will also help me control my senses, which ought to aid in my concentration. I also discovered that swinging is made easier by my spidey sense, which is the ability to aim instinctively. Niece, huh? He questioned, then scowled. The only other issue he discovered, he groaned, was bugs. He had a sudden onset of bad memory. Yes, it turns out that insects will fly into my face as I'm swinging. Which is why I've done this, so that it should help keep bugs out of my mouth. He reached down and produced a black balaclava with 2 eye holes. Combine that with these goggles, he said, sewing them onto a mannequin head he had discovered at the dump. And these will help me control my powers, he concluded, admiring his creation. After adjusting the mask and turning back to face the camera, he said, "Now, let's give them a test drive." He then pulled the mask over his head and looked at the time, realizing it was getting late. Tomorrow, day 131 of the spider experiment. Swing test 06 fast forward. With his eye lenses adjusting with him as he swung with greater ease, he flipped in the air as he felt weightless, before firing another line and swinging again. He quickly began to get the hang of it as he swung across the rooftops, using his second web shooter to pull himself away from the billboard sign. "Yeah, it's better than the last time," he cried as he swung. He experienced a sensation of exhilaration and liberty that he had never experienced previously. It was an inexplicable feeling that he craved. Eureka! He fired another line and swung, using his talent and instinct with each swing to flip and somersault through the air. After flipping up in the air and landing on the rooftop's edge, he grinned and pulled off the mask to assess his progress. "That was awesome," he exclaimed. "But," he said, glancing around the 24-meter-tall warehouse, "these warehouses don't offer the full range I need to test out the web shooters." Before his face began to frown, he turned to face the city as an idea dawned on him. "Yeah, I've gotten swinging down in low environments, but compared to the high rises in the city, I need a better test." "What? I'm not able to do that. It's against the law. If the police find me swinging around the city, I could be in big trouble. I might not be able to attend UA if I was discovered. However, I can turn invisible, and I just need a quick test of the aerodynamics in a metropolitan environment," he thought as he quickly dismissed that notion. "Even so, would I be prepared to break the rules in order to try out my web shooters?" Looking down at his mask in his hands and staring at his reflection in the lenses, he asked himself, "But then again, if I don't give everything I do my all, I can't really call myself a hero, can I?" With a sigh, he asked himself. As he knelt in front of the camera, he checked to make sure nobody was listening, not even All Might. "Well, I could get into trouble for this. However, it will only last for one night in order to validate my theory. To test my web shooters, I'm going to climb to the top of the tallest building and swing across one block. Since I can only stay invisible for 15 minutes at a time, I should have enough time to finish the test and return home. How could something go wrong?" As the screen went black, he turned off the camera. Day 132 of the spider experiment, untitled. Izuku Midoriya sat in front of his desk with the camera turned on. He had small bandages on his face, his hair was disheveled, and there were small bruises all over his face. "So," he said, rubbing his neck with his hand, "I nearly destroyed my hero career before it even started. However, it's not what you believe." He rubbed his arm in shame. "Well, I had to explain to All Might what happened, and let's just say, he wasn't impressed," he said quickly. "No one saw me swinging across town and I didn't get caught. All Might was able to work things out with the police, and because of the circumstances surrounding me, they will not file charges for vigilantism. But he claims that he is fortunate not to be incarcerated at the moment. And now, Mom is also aware. Everything had to be revealed to her, including my covert relationship with All Might and the reality of my quirk." Rubbed his face and leaned back in his chair. He leaned forward on his desk, rubbed his face, and looked directly into the camera, saying, "I nearly messed everything up. And you want to know why this all happened? Well." He then turned around and stepped out of the way of the camera. Because of her, a small girl was lying on his bed, wrapped in his blanket, her arms bandaged and one of his All Might shirts covering her body, making her look adorable. Her hair was bluish off-white, messy, and unkempt, parted in the middle of her forehead. the length almost reaching down to her waist. Her skin was soft and pale, and her innocent red eyes were closed. Her long brown horn that protruded from the right side of her forehead was her most distinguishing feature. She whimpered a little and bundled herself up even more in the All Might blanket, but Izuku seemed to ease her into it with a comforting hand on her head and a gentle smile as he ran a hand through her now clean hair. "Are you curious about the beginning of this? I'll tell you," he said to the camera, keeping his hand on her head. "It began similarly to everything else that occurs in my life," he said, casting a determined glance behind him. "Someone called out for help, and my body moved on its own."
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.